When Xbox Game Pass launched in May of 2017, industry analysts didn't have a good idea of what to expect from it. The Xbox team was trying something wholly new in the gaming industry, a subscription service that functioned as a direct pass to digital game licenses. Unlike streaming, bundles, games as a service, Game Pass would hand you the full digital licenses to over 100 games with new titles arriving monthly. Since its launch, Game Pass has become an industry phenomenon, with millions of subscribers and other companies racing to follow the model. Why is that significant? How has Game Pass changed game interaction on the Xbox and now PC? And what does it mean for the future of game sales? I analyze those questions and more on this episode of Industry Perspective. Over the course of this generation, the industry has changed greatly. While we saw digital adoption begin to grow in the latter part of last generation, it is now the primary way games are purchased and growing year over year. But just as we have seen with music and home movies, subscription services are beginning to become more prevalent. Gaming subscription services are still in their relative infancy, though it's worth touching on a few key points in that history. And if you really want to dive into the archives, look up the Sega Channel from 1994 for a fun read. But more recently, it's worth remembering OnLive, which conceptually was far ahead of its time, seeing as it debuted over 9 years ago in 2010. But trying to compete with the Xbox 360 and PS3 at the time, which had established user bases and big budget AAA titles in a less digitally mature market, proved futile in the end. Sony, meanwhile, saw a future in the game streaming space and not only purchased some of the OnLive patents when they went defunct in 2012, but also purchased Gaikai in 2012 as well. Gaikai would be the foundation upon which PS Now was built, which officially launched in 2014. Now, while PS Now has done well and continues to improve, which I'll talk more about later, it was Xbox Game Pass's introduction in 2017 that truly moved the bar forward for the industry. Likely the largest factor which allowed Game Pass to separate itself from prior subscription options is the fact that it didn't rely on streaming. Rather, by utilizing digital licensing in the existing Xbox Live infrastructure, Game Pass simply grants members the ability to download titles as if they had purchased them digitally. This, of course, eliminates any concerns about location, bandwidth, and latency. But likely the most significant step forward for the service came when it was announced in early 2018 that all first-party titles would launch day and date into Game Pass alongside their physical and digital copies. Combined with growing third-party agreements that would see some third-party titles also launching into the service, it became instantly more attractive to consumers. Why pay $60 to see if you like a new title when you could pay $10 for a month of Game Pass, try that game and many more, and then cancel if you didn't like it? Now, since its launch, Xbox Game Pass has seen incredible success. While the Xbox team doesn't share statistics on subscriber counts, there's enough data on player counts and usage to glean some insight. The Xbox team has stated clearly before that there are millions of subscribers, while major titles like Gears 5 and Forza Horizon 4 most recently have seen player counts surpass 3 to 5 million in just a few days post-launch. Now this has led to more third-party developers, particularly smaller developers, putting their games on the service. We've seen titles like Blair Witch from Bloober Team, Outer Wilds from Mobius Digital, Warhammer Vermintide 2 from Fat Shark, and Ashen from Aurora 44 all launched successfully on Game Pass alongside their physical and digital launches. And some of these have been exclusive to the service prior to landing on other consoles as well. Now obviously, it goes without saying that several concerns have repeatedly been raised in relation to Game Pass. Are developers receiving their fair share of the profits? What incentives are there for developers to put their games on the service at launch? How do major first-party releases negatively impact other games on the service when they release? Will this reduce game sales drastically? And so on. Now, while we don't have definitive answers to all the questions as we are not privy to the contract details between Microsoft and these third parties, the data that has been shared has almost universally alleviated concerns, and that comes directly from Xbox and the developers themselves. In speaking with GamesIndustry.biz, the ID at Xbox lead Agostino Simonetta shared data from Game Pass subscribers, and there are some notable statistics. First off, subscribers play about 40% more games on average than non-subscribers, and that includes titles from outside of the service. So while that may seem relatively obvious, there's substance beyond what you would expect. To quote Simonetta, people that join the subscription are way more engaged. Well, they have a lot of free games to play, of course, but actually they're way more engaged outside of the subscription. They go out to stores and buy more games than they did before they joined. I think most notable, though, is that 91% of subscribers say that they have played games they wouldn't have played if they weren't part of Game Pass. According to Simonetta, this echoes what is seen with music and movie services as well. This is vastly important as this translates directly to developers and the games they make. Over the past several years, we've heard how only certain genres rise to the top of the sales charts, and it was becoming more and more challenging for studios to take risks or try something new. With Game Pass, subscribers trying so many games in the service and finding new genres and titles to love that they may not have otherwise, it's a fantastic incentive for developers to put forth something unique. Simonetta shared further, "For us, there's no genre that is not relevant because we really want to offer a great menu where customers can decide, you know what, I want to try something new." Likely the argument most frequently heard from naysayers is that Game Pass will negatively impact sales. After all, why buy a game that you can play at a lower cost, as I mentioned earlier? However, while it may be surprising, the data shows exactly the opposite. In fact, Game Pass not only improves the discovery of games, but it improves sales figures as well. On average, a title launching into Game Pass generates 25% additional pre-order volume and an overall increase of 10% in sales. No More Robots, the developers of Descenders, said they saw nearly a 400% increase in total platform sales when the title arrived on Game Pass. Mike Rose, the creator of the game, had the following to say. "Sounded like bullshit, right? Weirdly, it's true. It surprised me. Being on Xbox Game Pass means that you basically have constant featuring on Xbox. Your game is on the dashboard all the time. People are seeing our game every day. And because of that, during launch month, our Xbox sales, we didn't do any discounts on it or anything, quadrupled, and have now settled to about 3 times as much as before. It's essentially an advert, a straight up advert. And now Xbox is asking, oh, can we feature Descenders in more of Xbox Game Pass advertising? Yes, you can. Of course you fucking can." Now all that is impressive already, but there's a key that you don't hear about as often as sales, and that is player engagement. As games become more accessible in different ways, from free to play to subscription, the key is often not direct sales, but rather player counts and engagement. That is, how many people are playing your game and how often do they play it. This is quickly becoming the most important way to measure a game's success for a number of reasons. First, social media presence and streaming notoriety lead to word of mouth and thus further sales and continued engagement. But the main reason is that when players continue to play a game, they will often invest further into it. With so many titles containing in-game purchases nowadays, it's a no-brainer that the more people who play your game, the more money a developer and publisher will make, regardless of how they first play it. There's likely no greater examples today than Fortnite and Grand Theft Auto 5, which continue to generate billions of dollars of revenue year over year. And with Game Pass being so accessible for some major titles, The Outer Worlds being a good example, it's shifting player counts across platforms. Multi-console gamers now have a choice to make: buy the game for $60 on the PS4 or simply play it at launch on Game Pass. But what's most interesting about that, at least to me, is the data showing positives on the other side of the coin in addition to Xbox player counts. Services like PSN, Switch Online, and Steam often offer sales or discounts to try and counter a title being playable on Game Pass, which of course leads to further sales on that platform as well. It's for these reasons we are hearing from developers that Game Pass is increasing player counts and sales across all platforms, not just Xbox. Therefore, it goes without saying that developers and publishers are eyeing Game Pass as a very viable option for their titles. These successes have directly impacted the bottom line of the Xbox division for Microsoft. In July of 2018, it was reported that annual Xbox revenue had surpassed $10 billion for the first time in the brand's 17-year history. Meanwhile, earlier this year, it was reported that active Xbox Live users had grown to 65 million, growth of 14% year over year, while software and service revenue had grown 12% year over year. And keep in mind, this is despite a large drop in the number of consoles being sold as we approach the end of the generation. Game Pass's growth and success hasn't gone unnoticed. Industry-wide, we're seeing movement from major companies to align or compete with the service directly. The most obvious direct comparison is PlayStation Now, as I referenced earlier. However, even though it's been around for over 5 years, it's never caused much of a stir on the market, with subscribers only totaling 700,000 as of March of 2019. However, earlier this year, Sony made a change to allow certain games to be downloaded and played from your local machine rather than streaming, the first step in evolving the service. But most recently, we saw some major changes which instantly made it more of an attractive proposition. Major first-party titles are being added to the service, nearly all games can now be downloaded instead of streamed, and the month-to-month pricing was cut in half to $9.99, coincidentally, the same price as Game Pass. Don't believe for a second as well that major publishers aren't paying close attention. At E3 this year, Ubisoft announced Uplay Plus, a new subscription service for PC which offers a large catalog of Ubisoft's titles, including all of their new titles at launch, for $14.99 a month. And there's rumors starting to circulate that EA is planning to expand EA and Origin Access into something similar. So long story short, the ways in which players will access games in the future will look a lot different. Now, of course, it's not all celebration and champagne. There are still concerns raised from time to time with Game Pass and other subscription services. For instance, if every major publisher and hardware developer introduces a subscription model, what will that look like for average gamers in just a few years' time? One of the toughest challenges these services face as they grow is curation and ensuring titles are given their fair share of attention when thousands of games are eventually available. It's a challenge that Steam has faced for years. And some developers are still vocalizing their concerns around receiving a fair share of the platform's profits comparative to the game's performance, which is likely a tough balance at times. But without question, Game Pass has been a resounding success. Regardless of whether you adore Game Pass, despise subscription services altogether, or fall somewhere in between, there's no denying the impact that it's had on the industry. Other companies are following suit, and there's no doubt in my mind that we're going to see more services like it as we move into the next generation. And where it can get even more interesting is the capability to provide these services out of their standard ecosystem. For instance, using Game Pass on a Switch. I've written about that previously, so you can check out that article if you like, and it's not as crazy as you would imagine. But we'll have to save that conversation for another episode. For now, I'm going to go prepare for the launch of The Outer Worlds. I'll be playing it on Game Pass.